I'm working on a new book, a collection of essays edited from the last several years of my columns in the Springfield News Leader. And the very last column I worked on Wednesday afternoon before I shut down the office and turned off the computer and went home was one about gun control that I wrote in the month after the Sandy Hook incident. After that December 2012 tragedy in which a lone gunman killed 20 children and 6 adults, it seemed in that moment that reform was inevitable. Though we have between 80 and 90 gun deaths in America every day, this particular incident, this nightmare, this horror of the deaths of so many children in one day in one school, surely that would cut through the opposition. Surely the indifference would be lifted, and even the NRA-bribed Congress would finally have to restore sanity to America's gun laws. And there was a lot of talk. Even the president made promises. But weeks came and went. People got interested in other things. Paula Deen said the N-word. The Duchess of Cambridge had a baby. George Zimmerman was found to be not guilty when we all knew he was guilty. People forget. They move on. A week, a month, 2 months, and the deaths of the children at Sandy Hook Elementary ended up meaning nothing at all on a national level. When I sat down to watch the news on Wednesday evening, like all of you, I found myself going back to very familiar territory. The territory of shock, horror. A racially motivated young man went to the Wednesday night prayer meeting at Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. I don't know what the right adjective is. He shot, he executed, he murdered the pastor, 8 other church members, while shouting racial epitaphs from 100 years ago. You rape our women. I mean, it's right out of To Kill a Mockingbird, stuff that should have been consigned to ancient history along with the Confederate flag that still flies over the Capitol in Columbia, South Carolina. Amen. That should only be seen in a history museum. Now, 2 weeks from today, I'll be preaching at the Unitarian Church in Columbia, South Carolina. And if that flag is still flying, I may not be out of jail in time to get back and preach 3 weeks from today. I know that a lot of what is wrong with America is the heated, divisive language that keeps us from ever reaching a consensus. I agree with my friends that keep insisting that we can't keep turning up the heat of the rhetoric, that we've got to find a way to respect each other on both sides of issues and reach some kind of logical consensus. But when it comes to matters of racism and gun control, I don't think that we have been moderate too much. I think it's time to turn the heat up, because we cannot be nice, we cannot be loving about racism or about gun control. The Confederate flag is not a symbol of Southern pride. I am a son of the South. I have lots of Southern traditions that mean a lot to me. But the tradition of owning slaves and of racism is nothing to be proud of. And we all know that that's what that flag represents. There is not a soul that's got a rebel flag in the back of their pickup truck that is saying anything but they hate black people. It is morally no different than having a swastika. And we would not tolerate any American state capital flying a swastika over their capital. We tolerate racism against blacks because the sane members of our society have been too quiet. We have not raised our voices together and demanded that such flagrant symbols of racism, of lynching, of discrimination, and of slavery be removed from public display. We don't need patience at a time like this. We need passion. Today, the survivors of this horrible mass murder have the sympathy of the entire world. Now, the media always loves to turn to the absurd outliers, the the NRA board member who blamed deceased Pastor Clementa Pinckney for personally being responsible for his own death because he had advocated legislation that prevented people from carrying concealed weapons into churches, or the Fox News commentators who initially tried to deny the racial nature of the murder, saying that it happened because we liberals have declared a war on Christianity. Some even saying that we pastors should arm ourselves so that we could shoot anyone who threatens us, as if people like me are not dangerous enough already. But these people are too stupid to be allowed to rent space inside our skulls. We don't need to waste time talking about them, and I even wish late-night talk show hosts and comedians wouldn't give them any attention. They don't even deserve to be ridiculed in public. They don't deserve to be talked about. Just as I've resolved never to mention the names of shooters in these mass murders, because I don't want to recount their story. I don't want to give their reasons. I don't want to try to make it make sense, and I sure don't want them to become famous for being evil. And I don't want to dissect the misinformation and propaganda being spewed by conservative talk radio or on Fox News. I just want to implore you to do the one thing that will hurt them the most. Never listen to them again. Not even as an example, not even as a joke. Don't watch their news programs. Don't listen to their radio programs, and don't repeat the names of mass murderers. There's very little reason even to talk to the kind of people who say, guns don't kill people, people kill people. I dare say that there has never been a person born that could stand on 2 feet that actually believed that mantra. But anyone who says it has already abdicated any fealty to reason or information or facts. So I have no interest in engaging in a battle of wits with an unarmed opponent. There is no point to it. Still, I recognize that this is not just a gun issue. I know that the mentally ill have much greater access to lethal weapons than they have access to counseling. I know that there is a serious addiction problem in our nation, and that many of the most heinous crimes committed in America are committed by someone who is intoxicated or high, either from legal prescription drugs or alcohol or illegal drugs. In the case of this mass murder in a church, there is clearly and unmistakably a racial motivation. The opponents of gun violence will try to, or the opponents of gun regulation, will try to play the game of diverting attention to blame all sorts of other issues that keeps our country from having the conversation that we must have, which is that no other developed nation has this problem of mass murders. No other nation has the frequency or the body count that the United States has. And the only real difference is the fact that those nations have more strict gun laws than we do. That's the only determining point. There are literally millions of responsible gun owners. My brother owns guns. My father owns guns. They will tell you that they know how to handle them. They know how to keep their guns safe. But when there are hundreds of millions of guns floating around in our nation, it is completely impossible to keep them all safely stored. It is impossible to say that you can keep 200 million guns all secure. And every gun owner, no matter how low their IQ is, no matter how addicted to drugs or alcohol, or how profoundly disturbed they are, every single one of them would tell you that they are a responsible gun owner and that their guns would never be used to hurt anyone. Yet over 100,000 times a year, they're wrong. 32,000 Americans die in gun-related accidents or incidents every single year. 7,700 children were admitted to the hospital with a gunshot wound last year. What other product would we allow to exist that puts 7,000 children a year in the hospital? Clearly, since everyone thinks that they are a responsible gun owner, and yet tens of thousands of people are killed every year and 100,000 are wounded, it's only logical to assume that every single gun owner represents a danger to every single person in America. That's a hard fact for Americans to hear, but mathematically, statistically, it is undeniably true. There's simply not even a point for conversation. There is no logical refutation of this. There is, however, militant ignorance. And one of the things we're opposed to is militant ignorance. We do everything we can conceivably do to minimize the number of deaths from car accidents or in product safety issues, yet we do everything possible to make sure that it is easier and easier for a crazier and crazier population to get lethal weapons whenever they want to. As tragic as the Emanuel Church murders were, those 9 deaths represent only 10% of the people that were shot and killed on Wednesday. The NRA uses their lobbying power to do everything they can to keep us from talking about the annual carnage in America. They've been able to make it illegal to sue gun manufacturers for gun liability. No other product in America is protected from liability exposure but the gun industry. They've even made it illegal for the Center for Disease Control, that keeps records of how many people die falling off ladders, how many people die from electrocution. The CDC keeps records on how Americans die, except they are no longer legally allowed to keep records of gun deaths. They are protected from us even knowing how many Americans are being killed. They fight even the most obvious and minor restrictions on the number of guns you can buy, the amount of ammunition, or even the kinds of weapons, or even the kinds of bullets, that they're even opposing limitations on cop killer bullets, or even 100-round drums of ammunition. I am all about reasoned debate and negotiation. I'm all about trying to logically come together on both sides of the fence to solve a problem. But when you don't have anyone on the other side to negotiate with, pretending that you've got a negotiation is just wasting time. If facts, information, research, critical thinking are ignored, suppressed, even made illegal, then you just have to stop feeling that we can't change things until we have the permission of the NRA. They have demonstrated themselves to be, as Jon Stewart has observed, more dangerous to America than ISIS. We need to give them no more space in the conversation than we would give to any domestic terrorist organization. We don't need the permission of the NRA to act like we're sane. I know that politicians have been afraid of the influence of the NRA, but those politicians who cannot stand up to such an obvious evil do not deserve to be in office. We wouldn't elect someone who took political donations from ISIS. Why would we elect someone that took political donations from the NRA? We wouldn't accept a politician who won the endorsement of Al-Qaeda. But no foreign terrorist organization has 1% of the American blood on their hands that the NRA has. So how can the NRA still be a thing in American politics? The lectionary reading before us today is one of those alternative voices from our ancient scriptures. Most people in Job's day, most people in our day, are inclined to insist that God is in charge of everything and everything happens for a reason. I hear that so often. Everything happens for a reason. The belief echoed in the Psalms and in the Proverbs that God blesses the righteous, punishes the wicked. We've told one another that the Lord will provide, that the Lord is our shepherd. We've told one another that the Lord will never give you more than you can bear. We've even said this one that is just, there are very few things that would push me to physical violence, but when someone says, all things work together for the good of those who love the Lord, it makes me crazy. The person that wrote the book of Job was calling BS on that line of religious jargon. He had seen the wicked prosper and the righteous get nothing but a raw deal. Job, for 40 chapters, shakes his fist at God, telling him that the world is not fair, that horrible things happen that don't make any sense. And in point of fact, not only do not all things work together for the good of those who are faithful, but it seems like the faithful all have a target drawn on them. The faithful are the objects of genocides, of false arrests, of holocausts, of beheadings, bombings, and even a mass shooting in a prayer meeting. In the end, God does show up in the book of Job and doesn't deny any of it. He confirms that Job was absolutely right. The world isn't fair. And more than that, I'm not even going to give you an explanation. I mean, that's really what this text says. You don't know, you don't understand, and that's just half of it. You're not gonna. Hundreds of years later, some ancient Palestinian fundamentalist wrote a theologically terrible new ending to the book of Job, in which he tries to make everything turn out well because Job gets more kids, a prettier wife, a bigger house, and more money. That's not the way the world works. And here, men and women, I'm coming down firmly on the side of the minority voice of Scripture. Maybe we should have seatbelts installed in our seats, but I'm going to take the minority side here. Because the universe is not going according to some divine plan. I know that we progressive liberals are always supposed to straddle the fence and what do you believe and how do you think about that? Well, I'll tell you, Soren Kierkegaard said you can't sew if you don't tie a knot in your thread. Let me tie a knot in the thread. The universe is capricious. It's chaotic. Things do not happen for a reason. Things just happen. That's the way it is. The universe is full of chaos. The universe, as it sits, is completely devoid of meaning entirely unless you bring meaning to it. It has no meaning on its own. Whatever meaning life has is the meaning that you bring to it. Lots of religious people this week have been quoting Martin Luther King Jr.'s response to the church bombing in which 4 children were killed 52 years ago. King talked about redemptive suffering, suffering that means something because it changes the world. You can say that Christ's suffering on the cross, Dorothy Day's imprisonments, Gandhi's hunger strikes, Romero's beatings at the hands of the police, you can say that all of these are redemptive suffering, but I will tell you, these could be just examples of senseless violence unless someone brings meaning to it. The universe is capricious, it is chaotic, it is devoid of meaning unless you decide to bring meaning to it. The deaths of 20 children in Sandy Hook Elementary was not redemptive on its own, and in fact, all of us have let them die in vain. We didn't get gun laws changed. Far from it, gun sales skyrocketed, particularly the kind of semi-automatic rifle, the Bushwhacker, that he used in killing those 20 children. Sales of that gun doubled and its value went way up. Both times that Barack Obama has been elected as president, gun sales have gone through the roof, and ammunition supplies, stores are not even able to keep it in stock. Bass Pro hasn't been able to keep ammunition on their shelves for years because the most dangerous people in the world buy up every bullet available. Suffering and injustice is not automatically redemptive. It isn't automatically anything at all. What you do about it, how you react to it, how you change the world, that's where the redemption is. There are going to be 9 new graves in a graveyard in Charleston, South Carolina. And that might be all it is. 9 fresh graves. Unless this time we change the world. In John Irving's wonderful fiction novel, Cider House Rules, the aging Dr. Larch keeps telling one of the orphans that they couldn't get adopted out. He was raising him, training him in medicine to take his place. And he keeps telling Homer, you have to make yourself useful. You have to be useful. The setting of the novel involved ethically challenged circumstances around abortion, caring for orphans, but also having to sometimes help a woman to terminate a pregnancy. Homer doesn't want that. Homer doesn't want to take over Dr. Larch's place as the sometimes physician and sometimes abortion doctor because, Homer says, I don't want to play God. Finally, Dr. Larch points out that, in fact, we owe it to the world to play God, because to do nothing is, in effect, to play an evil God. You either play God or you let the capriciousness of the universe just smother us in evil. Pastors often disappoint me because they try to remain popular by always taking the neutral position on every earthly moral dilemma, which is the opposite of what we have pastors for. As Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel said, take sides. Neutrality always serves the oppressor, never the oppressed. I wish that evil could be personified in a single living crazy shooter that we could arrest, put on trial, and execute. I wish it was that simple, but we all know it isn't. Blood has been spilled, innocent blood. Now, this can be the blood of martyrs, or it can be just the blood of victims of a violent crime. How you react makes the difference. I implore you this time, don't get distracted. Don't forget. Don't move on to the next exciting news story. Stay on this one until it becomes redemptive. Make yourselves useful. Sacrifice for social justice. Being neutral doesn't make you anything other than a paperweight, and that is not your goal. I'm imploring you to play God.
You have been watching a progressive Christian video from the Community Christian Church of Springfield, Missouri. We encourage our viewers to donate to our efforts in feeding the homeless and hungry of our community. Write to us at Rev. Dr. Ray at AOL.com for more information.